Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here, and I'm your professor for world history and American history at University of Toledo, and this video is called Dr. Dan's History Primer, and we're going to talk about a bunch of silly stuff for about 10 or 12 minutes that you need to know and that all of you already know, and you're going to get bored, but just humor me and go through it. So the first thing is, and I show this video in both world and American history, it's just the basics. So the first thing is the globe. I love a good globe, and the reason I have this out is because it's important that you know what continents are and that there are 7 continents. I know elementary school stuff, but again, just so we're clear, North America is a continent, South America is a continent, Africa is a continent, Europe is a continent, Asia over here is a continent, Australia's way cool because it's a continent and a country, so that's kind of neat. And then down here is Antarctica. It's a continent, but don't worry about it because nobody lives there. So there's that part. So I wanted to cover that first. The other thing I just want to mention while we had our globe out, all right, so every one of these continents obviously has countries in it. The reason I bring it up is because I've been grading papers for a long time now, and there's always confusion with Europe if you're not familiar with the globe and world history, and a lot of us take that knowledge for granted. But it gets confusing. So someone will say, well, Europe attacked Japan, and it's like, well, no, Europe didn't, because Europe's got Spain, France, Germany, England, all these countries. So just understand that and be careful when you're writing a paper or you're reading that you know what you're reading about. And continents, countries, basics, but you got to know them. The other thing is years and times, kind of important. So when you read in a book, in the 18th century, the colonists declared independence. Well, that means in the 1700s. So the 19th century is the 1800s, the 20th century is the 1900s. So understand that because some people get confused. And then if you ever see little letters behind a year like AD, CE, all of that stuff, you all know what that means, but just know that AD, which is Anno Domini, which is a Midwestern accent with Latin, never goes well, but it meant in the year of the Lord, and now we use CE for Common Era. Again, in my classes, we'll probably never use these things, but if you're reading something and you want to see them or you want to know what it means, that's what it means, so I thought I'd tell you. As far as history goes and like reading the textbook and trying to understand what the heck is going on, one way to approach it, and it's up to you, but it's a good way for me to explain it to people, that there are events and there are eras or trends and there are people, and those are kind of the things that I look at when I'm reading history. So if someone says, well, this was in the middle of the Renaissance, I'm like, well, what was the Renaissance? Was that like a day? Did something happen? No, it was an era or a trend. It's a theoretical container or naming device that historians use to classify things and to index time. So again, these trends or eras, you'll hear of, the Renaissance, and you'll hear of the Reformation and the Enlightenment. And generally speaking, these things don't have hard start or finish dates. So in American history, we might talk about Progressive Era or Gilded Age or Antebellum Era. Generally, they don't have a beginning or end dates. All right, sometimes they do. And if you're really bored and you want to have a good time, find a historian and just say, you walk into a bar of historians and you sit down and say, hey, the Renaissance started in 1311, and here's why. Well, then you could really get a great argument on your hands. So something you could try if you're bored after the pandemic. But anyway, so that's what these trends are. And so just understand that. It's not like people alive during that time knew what era they were in. It's not like someone opened the paper and said, oh, honey, the Enlightenment starts tomorrow. We better go to Costco or whatever. So it's not like that. And don't try to look at these trends or eras in buckets. Like, Renaissance is done, let's close that bucket, and then, here's the Reformation, let's open that one up. These things never really end, and that's kind of the cool thing about history, is that, the present is sort of this evolving past. So there's threads of the Renaissance and threads of the Reformation and threads of the Enlightenment and threads of all running through our present time in some way, shape, or form. So understand that. So that's what an era or a trend is. And the biggies for us are like Renaissance, Enlightenment's huge for us, Reformation, so those. The other thing is, so events are events like 9/11. All right, so September 11th, 2001, airliners crash into the World Trade Center. That's an event. All right, that's that happened. It's immutable. It happened on September 11th, 2001. It is what it is. It can be interpreted in multiple ways, but the event itself happened on that day, or like the dropping of the atom bomb. It happened on a certain day. So those are events. So when you're reading, you can kind of say, all right, is this thing an event or is it a trend? What is this? And so those are pretty straightforward. And then people finally are important because history is loaded with people, and rulers and kings and workers and everybody. And so people's interesting because when we think about how history changes, we really see it with people. So it's interesting. When I was growing up, and I'm like a ton older than all of you, but what back in the 2-room schoolhouse, very rural area. I grew up on a farm. Back in the 60s when I was in elementary school, we had the textbook, and Christopher Columbus discovers America in our text, and he's got his, there's a drawing of him on a boat, and he's got his arms out, and the natives are on the shore all waiting for him, and everything's wonderful, and he's this heroic guy. Well, that was back then. Now, he's like a schmuck because, it turns out all that Columbus really brought the natives was, smallpox, exploitation, and fast food, if you want to extrapolate it out. So, anyway, history changes, and it's because the way it's written changes and our attitudes change. So the lens that the historian is working through writing it is one thing, and then the lens with which you're reading it is different. I look at things differently than perhaps a woman of color in the South. So it's, we all have our different interpretations. So what the cool thing about that is for us that it's critically important that we understand what information literacy is, and I think it's like a social problem. I got a thing about it, but in history we have primary sources, so we investigate to the best that we can to find out what actually happened. So that's our evidence, that's our primary sources. So if a guy is writing about Columbus, and he's on the boat and he's with Columbus, then that's a primary source because he was there. And a secondary source is more like your textbook perhaps, or maybe even the media in some cases. So understand that, and the reason that's important is you need to, with everything you do, not just in history, but this information literacy, this idea of when you read something, who wrote it, is it mediated? Is it mediated meaning is it meant to convince you of something? Is it credible? Has it been peer reviewed? Are there primary source documents that back it up in the case of history? So if you read a blog on the internet and it says that gay marriage causes hurricanes, well, half the people in the country might say, oh boy, this is a big thing. But you, as someone who's taken history, is like, well, wait a minute. Okay, that may be true, but I need to see the evidence. So show me the research or the documents that proved this correlation between gay marriage and hurricanes. So again, information literacy, incredibly important. And if I can teach you nothing else in this class, just that is to be a really skeptical reader. So that's all I have for you. We did the continents, we did the time, we did events, people, and eras or trends. So we're kind of looking for those things. And we talked about how history can change based on the lens that we're looking at it through. And we talked about primary and secondary sources as historians' evidence. So that's it. I'm sorry this went so long. Look forward to having all of you in class. Have a great day. Bye-bye.